if you've been reading the news, you've seen a lot of potential use cases of how companies can be able to deploy these technologies to support their activities. And one such company is Palantir. And what they've managed to do differently is that they're not like Anthropic or OpenAI. They don't do them. They don't sit on the model layer. Those companies are competing on that, and they're competing on sheer model capability, not on its usage, on sheer model capability. And then you have players like Databricks. I'm saying these big guys: Microsoft, Google. You have, who are these guys? Microsoft, Google, Salesforce. And I am using this from the perspective of where most of these models are coming to. And this is the opportunity here within the continent, that the players who resemble these guys within our context do have an ability to figure out a way of partnering and identifying how you draw value out of this. But anyways, what I found very interesting about Palantir's model is that I think that they now call these people forward deployed engineers. Makofi kwangu, I know how to spell engineers. Forward deployed engineers. These are the guys that are sent to organizations to help them structure their data in a manner that models can be run onto them as they are, and then you can run applications. And as we had earlier established, this is where value comes in, because these are the use cases that drive the business or the economy. But then there needs to be an infrastructure that underpins all of it. So how is it that Palantir does it differently? And for me, I want to use them as a key framework, because that's the same thing that the OpenAI company, I think it's called OpenAI Deployment, and Anthropic Consulting, the new consulting arm that I was telling you they have raised. They're getting into this business, which is go to organizations, work with them to structure data, understand the constants of the models, so that you can inform them and tell them how the structure should be designed for these AI models to offer value to them. And why OpenAI and these guys, where are they deploying these people? To the people of Murima, who are big enough for this to make sense for them, because we don't run charities. These people are not charities. And if there's an open case around it where OpenAI was supposed to be a non-profit organization, they ended up converting to a commercial layer. It ended up having people like Ilya Sastiva, who was a chief AI scientist, leaving and starting their own companies. Even Anthropic got started because of difference in ideologies. It shows you that we are all still running a business. Even the biggest company that was supposed to have been done as a non-profit organization has now converted for a for-profit entity. And because they still are constrained resource-wise, they cannot deploy forward engineers to your organizations for every single person. And this, for me, is the opportunity for us. Organizations, tech should shift towards this. How do you do company ontology? And my understanding of it, and this is me being a lecturer, there's objects, there's relationships. I have forgotten the rest. Let me just write them down for you, all of them, so that nisikuwe na wadanganya. Then there is properties, and there's logic. These four key tenets can define what it means to build an ontology for an organization, including an individual. But I want to stay on the enterprise level, because this speaks to why I started the sovereign stack, the things I am doing on the second brain, and anchors the subsequent discussions I'm going to have in the remainder of my episodes, are going to be largely built on how I am building on the short-term structure with an understanding of where the future is supposed to be. So it's almost simultaneously trying to figure out how you adjust within those ecosystems. So when I talk about objects here, these allow me to bring down the analogy of an AI is a stateless being. Stateless. Doesn't remember anything, but it has the ability. It has been given the competence. Then you give it context. It's able to understand your organization and then apply its compute and ability, the model ability, to give you right? So take a case. and I will use it to explain objects ontology relationships. I have, in my every organization has departments. If you look at the hierarchy of things, it's an org here. I don't like red. There's an org here. There's a finance department. There's a HR department. There's an ops department. Let me even run with that. Right? And in the finance department, there are certain objects. There's accounting, and for those people who use QuickBooks, maybe they use that. Tell me, there is investment, there's how you handle budget, and in HR there is onboarding players, there is contracts, there is many other things. In ops, it's also client contracts with milestones. There is how your company runs, SOPs, etc., and objects, etc. So I'm trying to build a case, and when a person is onboarded into an organization, you usually come and you're taught about all these things. You're told in accounting, this is how you do. In accounting, you could be told this is how you make reimbursements, right? There could be many other things around that. Or you could come here and call them ops, these projects. Within projects, there are certain clients who you're handling. And then there are certain deliverables within these projects, contract, even within these projects, let me just call them. There are certain deliverables are what I call objects. In HR, there is a team. Every team has employees. An employee, I want to use consistent notation. An employee, all these things I've circled, these are objects. They define who's a person, what are the key building blocks of your organization, who are the clients. You need to be able to understand your clients, etc. Then you need to be able to map relationships. How do you do that within an org? You need to have information on if there is employee 1 and they're in department A and they handle client X, client Y, and they have deliverables 1, 2, 3. We've defined them. You need to map the relationship. You need to map a relationship that maps employee 1 to this department. Is employee 1 servicing department A, but they are from department B? You need to map this relationship, because if an AI doesn't know that and they see a person working on the tech team when they could have been working on ops team, they're wondering, is this person from this or is this person from here? So you have to be able to map a relationship across this, and this can be in contracts, can be in your org's structure in terms of where the data sits. Forget about that. Then I need to be able to map relationships between departments and certain clients. Department A can handle client X and Y. We will call department C client Z. Department B can handle client X, Y, and Z. Department C only handles client Z. Like, if there is such relationships within organizations, and this differ from any other organization, these needs to be mapped because they're not the same across. You know what I have realized? I have been speaking without recording my screen. And that is my cameraman realizing that. So apologies. I am back again. And this is the point where I realized that I had not recorded the screen. So hopefully we found a way of being able to show you what I had been discussing, every single thing. And you've just found me at the relationship layer, and hopefully now you're going to see it through the recording as I'm actually writing it live. So you're mapping all these relationships, and every organization have different relationships within the organization. And this is something, if you've done very good documentations of your organization, these are information that can be extracted from those documents, so that before you actually deploy an AI model to your organizational data, you work on structuring it and ensuring that all the information you've been given has been mapped out through knowledge graphs. That's what RAG was supposed to do, and then Graph RAG is doing it a lot more better. Our knowledge graphs are the ones that are mapping all these relationships. And then you have something called properties. These properties are, and I'll just use one example, employee 1. What properties do they have? They have their email address. That identifies them. You have their age, so that when you're taking out insurance, you're able to understand all those things. You have their names. You have their identification documents. You have, what else are things that can define relationships? Their title, what they do in the organization, their JD. You get the idea around it. And then you can have properties like a client. And I trust that these things are, for those of you who are computer scientists, this is how you do your DB mapping, like your database architecture schema, relational diagrams, etc. You're able to do that. I know I didn't study that, but I at least know there's a way in which you structure your database schema handling this. But within the AI ecosystem, that's the same concept around it. You have a client sector they are working on, the client needs, which projects you're handling under a client, the contracts that you have with the clients, their payment details, their terms for how you're engaging with them. These things also have properties attached to milestones and what are the payment. At what point do you get paid when you deliver a certain thing? What agreements do you have in place with them if it's not contracts, if you're doing a partnership? All these have to be defined. They could be a client they are known across many sectors, but you only work with them for a specific sector by yourself, right? And this property is very important to work because in the JD, you will have properties of an individual person, and that's where the relationships start getting mapped out of, based off of certain properties and the objects that are working out of that. And then there's a logic, which is, for me, a very important aspect. You have a logic. The logic determines this, and I will give you a very classic example that will close this case. When you want to know the person's permission, if you've done very good documentations of SOPs, you say, when you are going on a trip to the field and you're asking for per diem, the process through an SOP determines that you make an application and ask for an approval from Nyangena, right? But what is the logic? If Nyangena is not around, what is the failsafe? Because if the AI doesn't know these things, it won't define for you. So you almost need to define, if Nyangena is not there, it is going to be, I don't know, Edith who will do this. If it's not Edith, it's going to be Lily who's going to do this. So that you've put the logic. And then on top of it, there needs to be, even in the logic, permissions. The logic is, if you are in HR, you're allowed to see everything about a person's contract. But if you're a manager of a person, information such as their salary, their terms, might be, according to your HR policy, information that a manager or other employees should not have access to. So what is the logic for when you point an AI to the contract of a person? How do you enforce these permissions? How do you enforce privacy? How do you enforce the logic of a HR has these functionalities based off of their properties, and logically this is the steps of what they need to be able to do? What's the logic for how you onboard a client? What's the logic for how you deliver your things? Those are your way of working, and sometimes these are documented, and at certain times these are also not documented. And when you start implementing these things, you get to a point where, I don't know if you know these things, you don't need to tell an AI that if Nyangena is not around, go to the next person. Even if it's not documented, these are things that become institutional knowledge slowly. Or if you've been in the organization 5 years ago, you don't need to be told client properties. Some of these things you know, and depending on how you build teams, this cross-organizational context needs to be shared the right way. And how you share it the right way needs to be defined through an ontology. So that you don't have your AI, if you remember the example I told you where I pointed to my emails and I ask it who are my employees, it starts having a problem. And why is this important? And I think this is a domain under which Palantir has sat and has helped a lot of, through their product called, I think, Foundry.